Hello, everyone. I am Abhishek Vemuri, a member of the World Affairs series, and it is a privilege tonight for me to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Aldo Magazzini. In the short time I've had to interact with Mr. Magazzini, I've found he is quite a diverse person. Our discussions have discussed the topics ranging all the way from Iowa State's decisive victory over Texas Tech to the existential musings on what causes us to do the work that we do. Mr. Magazzini organizes volunteer community service projects, building wells and water systems around the world through his nonprofit organization, Traveling Mercies. Though seemingly isolated, his efforts to have a far-reaching impact for the people they serve. Traveling Mercies partners with such groups as the Rotary, the Salvation Army, Voices of Women, and local churches to plan, fund, and implement its projects. Internationally, his work has included the installation of a well in Eldoret, Kenya, for the care of street children, water systems, daycare centers, and safe shelters for women and children in the Herat province of Afghanistan, and the installation of water catchments for the school buildings at the Tashirat Orphanage in Tezcatlipocan, Mexico. All of this came about after he established a successful business, Champion Fasteners Incorporated. He then combined his penchant for mountain climbing with a love of community service. At this time, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Mr. Aldo Magazzini.
Thank you very much, and we did, but you forgot to mention the swans, which I was very interested in your swans because I have a small farm back at home and I have swans also, so that was pretty interesting for me to see. It's really wonderful to be here, and I also am happy to welcome the friends, people that you see in these photographs. I always like to bring them into this room because when I visit them, I usually bring stories and photographs of the people that I have met here in my country. So I'm really happy to have them here. They're wonderful people trying to have lives like the rest of us, people that struggle maybe in some ways, in some different ways, much harder than we do. But it's really an honor to have them in here. And I thank you for taking some time out of your busy, important lives to come and sit together as a community to hear some stories about the world that I've traveled in and that I'm able to share that with you. I want to thank Pat Miller for inviting me here and the committee of all her wonderful people that I've met so far that have made this lecture series such a tremendous asset to this community. Just a couple of quick little things. I didn't know much about your football team, but the other night I was home and I was trying to watch the Iowa-Penn State game because I'm a Penn State graduate. And I couldn't find it. So I'm flipping around and all of a sudden there's this Iowa State and Texas Tech game on. I'm like, I want to see Iowa and Penn State. Then all of a sudden I realized, wow, this is where I'm going. And I really watched the game, and it looked fantastic. So I started getting introduced to Iowa State in ways that started to come into my life, and what a great football game that was, and I'm really glad you beat Texas, too. The other thing is I also didn't realize that you have such a national prestigious event going on here. When the caucus is about ready to start here for the next presidential. I told Pat it would be a good idea to maybe announce before everyone else did to run, but she told me it wouldn't be such a good idea, so I don't think we'll do that. But we can have some fun with that. But it's just before I speak to you about what I do, I just want to tell you that it's been great to come and see something I knew existed. And reinforced how many wonderful things are happening in this world and in this country. Today I got to speak to your local Rotary Club, a couple of your classes in school, and it's very inspiring to come here and leave with new stories that I can tell my friends back in Pennsylvania. So I do thank you so much for sharing this time together. I'd like to talk a little bit about global citizenship, activism to help other people, and some stories about the works that I do. Traveling Mercies is a nonprofit, and it's one that I've been working at for the last 3 years as a nonprofit, but prior to that, it was basically the same. It was myself doing the work that Traveling Mercy continues to do today. Traveling Mercies in Afghanistan, Kenya, Haiti, Mexico, and other countries. A road to activism in each of these places became clear and familiar, and that is the call to do something. For the students that are here, the idea of doing something is just 2 words, but it really affected me a lot when I was in Bhutan right before the Iraqi war started, or when it started, and I was very upset that we were entering another long period of what we've experienced in the past and could see the future of what's happened in the last 5 years. It was really upsetting, but I was so far away. And a good friend of mine said, sometimes we ought to stop complaining about what we see. We ought to stop being cynical about politics, critical about power of corporations. And sometimes we ought to just go do something for people and have a relationship and keep it really simple. And I remember those couple little words, and it really was powerful for me because I realized, I'm not going to waste energy doing a lot of unproductive things. I'm just going to go do something. It was a good philosophy, so I'll talk about that a little bit more. But sometimes when we don't know what to do because we're trying to come up with some pretty big ideas, let's just go do something kind, for somebody, and the world gets a little better that way. The road to activism for me has been an experience about global citizenship. Socrates once wrote that all people of the world have a right to the privileges of the world, that we're not only members of our family and citizens of our community, state, and country, but that we are citizens of the world. And hopefully that's what you see in some of the images of these people that I've spent so much time with. I was working at a local shelter in Philadelphia, and I learned something there also that helped me in some of the philosophy about how to work with people that I did not know and may have been of different cultures. But it was a shelter for women, and someone had written on a large brown paper in a hallway, and it became something that I knew I was beginning to do, but it made the understanding of it pretty clear when she wrote, if you have come here to simply help me, you are wasting your time. But if your liberation is bound to my liberation, then let us begin to work together. It was a small statement, but it taught me some things, which meant that when we go and we want to have a relationship working for people, we must also understand that it must be on an equal basis. We don't go and just do things and make people feel as if they're less than we are. We have a need to also become more human, and they have a need to become more human. We do that by exchanging ideas and assets. Just to speak about one more that really sort of have helped me along the way, some of my friends, although not living. Leo Tolstoy once expressed that there is only one thing in this world which is worth dedicating all our life, and this is creating more love among people and destroying the barriers which exist between them. The great teachers and the mystics, the humanitarians of the past, live in these messages. But the wisdom and grace that inspired them continue to live today, and all of us also. And this is one of our greatest gifts, and that's the divine spirit that each of us have. Our life experiences teach us some of the most important ways to live our lives, but it offers us the choices, and in those choices we learn and grow. In our life, in my life in specific, I've learned from so many. I've learned from my parents, I've learned from my teachers, and I hope all the students that have an opportunity to go to this, what I've seen so far, this amazingly fantastic university, not just because it's such an incredibly beautiful structure in a beautiful area, but the people I've met here, the professors, and I know the parents that are participating. This is an incredible gift. But it's like most things in life, gifts always then required to be repaid. And the way I believe that, to repay this wonderful gift will simply be to do unto others as they, have helped you today. I hope you realize what great assets you have here. Because, understanding where we come from in our lives, understanding the things that, we have received and the things that we have been given really help us at some point when we reflect back and see why we are doing what we're doing. For example, for me, I want to tell you just a little bit about me and then the work that I've done. I was born in Italy post-World War II. It was a very difficult time, very poor. So I got to experience what may have been at that time an unfortunate way to be more into the world, living in a community and living in small, really, really poor homes in a village without water, without bathrooms, understanding that sort of experience. And then later I was able to come to Philadelphia and learn about communities of immigrants that work together. And in working together, they were able to improve their lives. Those experiences back then may have seemed like, they were hardships. But today, they have become exactly what I'm rooted in the work that I do. Because I do spend lots of time working in communities and villages where people do still live in conditions that I remember that I was born into, were conditions where immigrants are trying to make a living for their family. So I say these couple things to try to make you conscious and aware of what you're experiencing today and to learn from it, because I think one day you'll see that it's preparing you for something. I went to Penn State, had a wonderful college experience, great friends, came out as a business major with a humanitarian degree also, and decided that I wanted to, and you may not know where you're going with what you do, but I wanted to, I first wanted to listen to my heart, and I wanted to do humanitarian work, and I worked in the city of Philadelphia working with juvenile gang kids and dependent kids, and that was a great experience for me. Because later on, when I found myself in the hills of Afghanistan, spending a lot of time talking to people I'd never met before, way up in these mountains, people that were, later told to me that they were, Pashtun Taliban people, and not being completely freaked out by them. I sometimes go back and I thanked all these really tough street gang kids that I spent so much time with that taught me how to be calm and trustful around people that I think are also relaxed. It is one of the things I've learned. As somebody said in an interview, asked, why is it that Aldo can go into these communities? And I say this humbly because the point is that why can he go in these communities and be okay? And she responded and said that it's probably because he goes there trusting them, and that when they know that he trusts them, it's easier for them to trust him. So there has got to be a sense of trust between relationships, even with people we don't know. But I spent time after that period of working with the city. I went into the business world. So I took another experience, and I think life's always teaching us new experiences to prepare us for what's coming next, but also evolving us in our own life experience. And I went and I was in the business world, and I was really excited. It was independent. I got to learn about business. I got to learn about building and how to put things together, and it was really, really helpful. But at some point, certain other things began to happen. I was an only child. Both my parents passed away. And many of you might experience this, and it only goes to the point to say, I am where I am today because those experiences altered my life. And although I may have wanted to see them as something that was absolutely sad, or maybe I wasn't willing to accept some of the changes, but now I see that we can only be here today because of those experiences. And as a result of that, I started to move out of what I was doing, and I wanted to go back, and I wanted to get stronger and healthier, and my parents and I loved the mountains, so I wanted to go do a bunch of mountain climbing, and I started to climb all over the place. And when I went back into these amazing mountains of South America and out in the Himalayas, and I realized that what I got there and when I was doing this, the love of that, the nature had drawn me in, but it had reintroduced me again to that very place that I was born, which is small communities and small villages. And now I knew that I had learned a lot of things and experienced a lot of things because I really knew that the work I really wanted to do was back to the beginning of the core of how I was born into this world. And now I had some skills. Not a lot of money, but I had some skills. So with that, I started to do community work, and I started to go to countries. And I knew we were having dinner tonight, and I was asked why foreign countries and not more local countries, and kind of that's how it happened. And I think who I was being called more to go out of the country than to stay in the country, and that was okay because wherever you do good work for people should never be judged. So I started to do that and started to go to places, and one of the countries I started working in was Haiti. After being in Mexico and South America, I went to Haiti, and this was maybe 10 years ago. And if any of you have been to Haiti, especially now with the recent earthquake, it's worse, but it hasn't. It was always real bad. But Haiti was just an absolutely incredible experience of suffering. But then when I got into all this suffering and tried to not sort of justify feelings by the difficulties that they experienced in the past, or the terrible ways that colonialism left such impacts on countries, but just to see it as for how it was at the time I was there, and what I saw basically was human beings suffering that had incredible hope, incredible spirit, and even great happiness. And I thought, how could this be possible? We have some things here, and we have some other things that we really suffer with. And how could this be? And then I began to see that, they were evolving in some different ways. They were evolving as hopeful people with faith, people with caring about one another. And I saw that there was great joy in working in what was some of the most deplorable conditions. So I started to do some work in Haiti. And from Haiti, I think I received the gift of the heart of understanding and yet loving people that were in such condition and feeling somewhat equal. So many times in Haiti, I'll say to myself, and some time to them, not only for myself but for others. Thank you for bearing the suffering that we've been spared, because in a world where there's so much inequality and injustice, some people have to bear that. Then the question is, what do we do? And I always go back and say, let's just do something. We will have better lives. I went to Afghanistan, which is something I'd like to talk a little bit about. Afghanistan is a country that was left behind when we started the Iraqi war, forgotten, and it reminded me, as someone mentioned to me, I was talking to this wonderful woman at one of the Salvation Army, and she said, it's kind of like, there's a battlefield after a battle, and everyone's leaving, but if you listen, you'll hear the sounds of those that have been left behind. And sometimes you have to go back in and help. And Afghanistan was like that. This was almost 9 years ago. And I thought, we left it behind, and it's going to, and people are going to be left suffering. They're not going to know who their friends are. So I really went there as a mission of peace, to say, if we can bring some culture barriers down, if we can get to know each other as human beings, we might be able to, even if it was just a half a dozen people that might have a new story to say, I've met this guy, and he's told me about his family, he's built us some water systems, and, maybe we ought to think twice about hating people we don't know, and bringing these stories back here. So I went there on my own. I mean, I could never imagine just picking up and going to Afghanistan completely alone. And this was in 2002. But I had built up a strong enough belief in the fact that if you approach people with good intentions in your heart, and if you are not there to take things from them, and they understand that you just want to have a human relationship, as many of the great people have said that people would at one time look at each other and express some human, divine acceptance of one another. If you could do that, can you do that with Afghans? And if you could do it with Afghans, can you do it with Kenyans? And can you do it with people in Mexico? And I can tell you that for the most part, unless you run into some pretty crazy people, for the most part, if a person can see that you have good intentions in your heart, he is mirroring his own heart. And so that's how. And I went there, and I went for a mission to meet people, to do some peace, knowing that I had some skills, but not knowing what to do. One of the things I learned from a great humanitarian, Dr. Paul Farmer, who always said, ask people what they need, and then help them achieve and get what they need. And I think that's a really important part of how we can do things. We need that the idea of people helping themselves has been destroyed around the world. People feel like they absolutely can't. We saw it in our own country too, in many ways, in poverty. But we have to be able to help people in any way and shape and form that they want to be helped and how they want to do it. And that was the approach. And I went there and I met people. I knew people would lead me to more relationships. I did some mountain climbing. I went and I met people, and lo and behold, somebody said, can you help us build a water system? I said, I think I can do that. I learned how to do it, got some information, came home, raised a little money, sold a great old BMW that I had that I didn't need any longer. And I went back, and I was pretty excited and naive. I mean, this was, as I had raised enough money to do the first water systems. This was back in 2003. And I went back and we built it. And then other villagers came and said, can you help us? And then the world started of how I learned to build water systems. And I also went from building water systems in the mountains of the Hindu Kush to building water systems in western part of Afghanistan, and building them for the men's jail, the women's jail, some schools. And we always did our projects together. I would go there, I would meet with communities, they would call for me, we would sit there just like we're doing tonight. Afghan leaders I'd never met before, and they would tell me what they wanted to do. We would discuss how it would be done. I'd bring in, maybe if it was a place where I could bring in a local engineer or one of the government people, they would be a part of it. We'd work out something, and together we built our systems. They would provide all the work, all the food. I'd provide the money, I'd buy the materials. And over the last, since 2003 till 2009, there's about 14 water systems that we built in both rural and inner cities, that we brought water to more than 70, 80,000 people of Afghans. And they all know the most important thing is two things. They know that their children are not as sick as they used to be, because fresh water is one of the fastest cures for what ails babies. 30% of children in Afghanistan were still dying before the age of 5 years old. So when they know that the intentions of how we did those particular benefits, that they came from small people, trying to keep it a real grassroots organizations. So there were thousands of people involved in giving little bit of money, and they know that, and so they can feel the kindness of thousands of people. And because of that, they work so hard. And when we were done in the last 6 or 7 years, depending on a little bit of money that we have some 70,000 people, some almost 15 to 20,000 families that have some access to clean water. And for that, I think it changes the picture of how they think of us and how we think of them. Afghanistan for me has also been very special because I do, and you've seen some pictures, of some of the women in the burqas. I do a lot of work with women rights in Afghanistan. The women in Afghanistan suffer from not necessarily the conditions that religion place upon them, or the conditions that the economy places upon them and makes their life hard. They're just in this place where power and male superiority has acted this role out for centuries. And it's still acting itself out in other parts of the world. And Afghanistan is one of these places. 50% of the population of Afghanistan are women. They don't get a chance to participate in the country. So, and they're in great danger. So I've worked a lot there with one of my great friends, Soraya Paxed, and we've built women's shelters to protect women. We make sure they have water and hygiene and things. It's a very, very important part of what I do, and it's a very important part of keeping your ears and eyes open for what's happening there so that these women do not get persecuted if the war really turns bad or worse than it is. My work in activism also took me to countries like Kenya and Ethiopia. In Kenya, I was really, really thrilled because I was able to build a water system on a self-sustaining village for 1,000 orphans. I met a great teacher. His name was Father Angelo D'Agostino. He was a Jesuit, MD surgeon, psychiatrist. He's 80 years old, and he's trying to build his village, and he asked me to stay with him. I do. I stay with him for almost a year, and we eventually put a water system that now farms almost 500 acres, and also cares for almost 800 HIV orphans. And the whole purpose of doing this was that there are almost 10 million orphans. Imagine that, 10 million. How can you even begin to think how do you care for 10 million orphans in sub-Saharan Africa? Most of the ways that the solutions for those problems are to use to use institutional solutions. Father D'Agostino was very brave in saying, no, what we need to do is we need to give dignity back to people, including HIV orphans and grandparents, and we need to build a sustaining community in which they can familiarize themselves with how they've lived for centuries, and let them live in a rural setting, and let us find a way to build some self-sustaining industries around them, such as farming and carpentry. And that's what we did. And we put a water system in, and that was another great experience of taking a road to activism. And when I was asked, would you stay with me? I knew there was no better place to be. I also have gone to Mexico, as you heard, worked with a great friend who I met. And most of these come from making relationships in Tepoztlan, which is about 2 hours south of Mexico City. My friend, a young girl in her early 20s, basically has given up a lot of her inheritance, which wasn't that great, but enough to start a school. And she's dedicated herself to care for some of the poorest children. And I've supported and worked with her, and it's made me also realize the beauty of Mexican children, and to have a more sensitive approach to a population in our country that struggle trying to live a life here. But we've been able to start a special ed school. We've been able to put water into this orphanage. So it's been a great example. So these roads to activism for me, being Traveling Mercies, is also about the fact that they may be roads that travel to different places, but ultimately they all bring us back home to the same place, which is that what you do and how you do a water system for an Afghan village, the same thing is possible and capable, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Haiti, or whether it's someplace else in this world. That to do something means to just do it clearly and openly with your heart. Now, I'm continuing to build water systems. I've got a wonderful project that I'd like to build this year, which we will build very shortly in Africa, and it's going to be the first co-op association in which we come up with a new concept that we're going to take 25 villages, and instead of installing separate wells, we're going to install one main well, and we're going to do farming on 50 acres, and they're going to run it as a co-op. They're going to share the water, they're going to grow the food, and they're going to distribute the food among their villages. And they're very good at doing this because they're an interdependent society. No one survives unless your neighbor's also surviving, so they know how to do it. So that's going to be a very exciting project. I've got at least another half a dozen water systems to put in Afghanistan, and also I'm putting in our third water well in Haiti right now. So these are the different roads that I've taken, and I'm really happy to share that with you, because I really just learned to react to what it is that the world needs. And you can see from all these photographs from people from Kenya to Afghanistan, they're just people that want to have a relationship, and if we find a way that we can do some good, we can help the world move towards peace rather than trying to keep our differences and trying to come up with solutions through military. So, Traveling Mercies is doing some nice work. I try to keep it as a grassroots organization because I really don't want to in some way raise funds through government agencies. I'd rather let us see what we think we can do to help people, and then allow small groups to help. Sometimes in universities like Penn State University, they got excited, so they decided, well, and this is what I really like. They decided, like, well, maybe we'll build our own water well for one of the villages. And so we'll take an active role. I mean, we don't necessarily have to go there, but we'll choose this village and we work it out, and they did. And it was very empowering for them, So there are things that we can do here. And I really do believe that one of the things that we do with communities is, especially in communities that you hear about in some of these countries, we always say, well, you have to build them from the bottom up. You have to, if the local villages get strong, then the local community gets strong, and then eventually maybe their corrupt government won't have power over people that now are themselves empowered. And I think that's a great, absolute right theory, given the fact that if the assets at least are left for them to be able to survive, to do this. But I will say this, it's the same here in our country. I mean, for this great, great country, for us to put our trust and our belief that the top will fix, and make us happier and fix our problems here in Nashville, I think it's the same thing. I think it's people that gather like tonight, Rotary clubs that gather today, community groups. I think this country also has to have another resurgence of let us do something to have world peace, and let us get involved and not give all the money to big agencies to spend it. So that's why I'm so happy to talk to groups and to come and do this, because it inspires me. And the people in these pictures, they know that too. They know that the way their lives will improve is through the relationship of regular people in this world. So thanks so much for letting me tell you some of my stories. I could tell you a bunch more stories, but I think Pat's saying I shouldn't tell you any more stories. How much time we got, Pat? Okay. Well, I'll tell you just two quick little stories then, and then we'll ask some questions. One of them is, the other thing about your school, which maybe somebody can help me out with, when I was trying to find out about who you are, and I was told it was the Iowa State Cyclones, but it's a Cardinal. Okay. So I didn't quite get... Oh, was that? Tornado Bottom. But the Cardinal is like part of it, right? Yeah. Well, anyway, I've got a Cardinal myself, and that's the Traveling Mercies logo. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but so I thought that was pretty curious, and I did. It was a great story because the reason it's there is, and I'll say this too, especially the students that are here and the elders that are also in this room. Some of the greatest teachers are your elders. And I was been blessed because, I've learned from some. And one of them was this Father Angelo D'Agostino. And he taught me a lot and encouraged me always. And I traveled with him. And he'd say, show your photographs and, do this on your own. And I'd say, okay, I think I'm going to do that. But then he'd say, no, stay with me a little longer. So I said, all right, fine. And we used to travel over the world speaking. But he got sick when I left him, and about 2 weeks later, he died in Africa. It was a big shock, although I thought that our relationship was limited. But when he died, the morning he died, I was home on my farm, and when I found that he died, I was kind of thinking about him and saying, well, you kept telling me, wait around for you, and now here you go dying, and I remember him always saying, well, go out there, do what you do, by yourself. And there were all these, and in our part of Pennsylvania, we have a tremendous amount of red cardinal birds. And that morning there were all these cardinal birds out there. So that was the decision. The morning that I said, okay, well, I guess that means it's time to start Traveling Mercies, and I'll use the cardinal as my logo. So you guys have a cardinal too. And I think it might be nice if you guys might want to ask some questions. Would you think you'd be interested in asking some questions? Don't be whatever's on your mind. Be about anything. Sure. Well, some of the pictures, like this one, is about an Afghan man, a father with his 3 children. One morning I took this picture, and what had sort of been on my mind, and I have, maybe one day we'll do a photo exhibit here, and I'm doing a couple. I did one at American U and Penn State and stuff. They're really beautiful. Maybe we can do that, because there's little tags, and actually if you go on the website, there's some explanations, but that particular picture with the 3 sons reminded me of how a father of trying to raise 3 sons in Afghanistan. I mean, all he can do is really love them, because I have friends who are raising 3 sons, and he's able to put them through law school and able to do all these other things. But in the end, all we're able to do is love. And if you can see that picture again, you'll be able to see they may have coats, but they don't have shoes. So what is a father to do? And these are a lot of my, this was one of my most favorite pictures, and if you'd see the photograph, it's a morning of having breakfast with my friends in a small, small room, and as we were eating yogurt and fresh bread called naan, we were able to have this moment where this sunlight just sort of burst through a small window, and I was able to take that picture. But it was a picture that just caught this moment of friends just having breakfast together, and it's really quite beautiful. And these are little Afghan friends with sores on their faces and always worried. There's so much worrying in some of these children, you know, because life is hard. And she's a great Afghan woman. And you see all this stuff here, this big brown stuff? So that was on her sort of little sitting area porch, but that's all manure that they gather and dry, and they use it for cooking. And she was just this beautiful, elegant old woman. And here's a young girl with her nephew. It really wasn't her son, but she had these most amazing eyes that just pierced you with openness, you know. And I was able to take her picture like that. It was just an absolutely beautiful picture of her, and her face wasn't covered, because Afghan women always have their faces covered in public, except girls, young girls. But when I went back about 3 months later, 6 months later, I guess she had gotten just old enough. And usually they determine that by when the girl starts to have her first menstrual cycle or so. Or that's when they are, they start to be covered and they have to wear burqas. But I guess I sort of caught her when she was still a little young. But when I went back the next time, her father wouldn't let me take her picture. It was just gone too far. But that was okay. There's a relation. And children and girls up in the mountains. But we'll explain some pictures. But would anybody have a comment? Or, yeah.
Actually, I have a question. So you mentioned how when you go into these areas, if you go in with a complete ethic of trust, you know, you usually get it back and you can do something productive. When you've gotten into these places, has there ever been like an experience where, I mean, you thought that you gave off a complete notion of trust, but you didn't get that back, or something that broke your faith in that principle that sometimes just won't away?
You know, I was going up through these Hindu Kush mountains at some point about a year or two ago, and I was lining up to do a bunch of water projects. So I'd go and talk to the villages, and you know, and go and we'd sit, and people would say, yeah, they'd explain the condition. I said, well, this is what we need to do. We need to do this and this, and you need to do this, and be okay. So I went to some other place. And I went to this one place, and they had become a little sophisticated because they'd been working on some international road project, so they had kind of learned how to play the game a little differently. So I said, this is how we do this. And they were like, no, we're very poor, and we can't work for nothing, and we need to be paid, and we need money, and if you want us to build a water system, then you have to pay us because we need to have money. And so I was like, what the heck? I was like, well, you know, you're right. I mean, you do. You need money. I understand. And it's only fair that, you know, if you had money, then you can go buy stuff at the shop and the next person. I said, but this is not about that. This is about you sacrificing so that you can get water for your family and your children, And you have to put in a special effort because basically all the people that have contributed money to this really put in they weren't just rich people that gave money. So we can't do that, you know. And they were like, no, we have to get paid, you know. And then I said to them, I said, you know, I'm really confused. I said, here you are, you're Afghans, you've like survived like a war with the Russians, you've survived like years of fighting the Taliban now. You've done this with centuries, and you're very proud. I said, where did you come up with the idea that anybody owes you anything? I mean, where did you come up with this idea, you know, that like all of a sudden people need to give you things? I mean, you know, that's a little bit. It was almost like, you know, people taking advantage of you. So it was like breaking some kind of trust of working together. And so I said, forget it. I'm not going to do that. If you want to do it, this is how we always do it, you know. So I left. And so then the next morning they came to wherever I was, thinking probably I would do it with somebody else. You know, came and said, oh, we thought about it. You're right. We shouldn't be like that. We'll do it. We'll do all the work and stuff. But, yeah, you know, it can get like that sometimes. But you just have to work with them, you know, because they're confused also, you know, because there's all kinds of things going on in their country that they don't know how to react to. Anybody else have a little question? Right here.
How do you keep track of all of these different projects that you're doing? Are they...
I've got help. I mean, I've really tried to keep the organization small. People wanted to build a big organization and do things, but I don't know. Just I compromise a little bit, you know. Compromise that, you know, I may not be doing as much as I could do, but that what I do is okay. Yeah. And I work hard. I do have people that help me, though. You know, I've got people that help me. But you know, I'd rather do it this way than be out of touch with it from, you know, just having a lot of people take care of things. So, yeah, it's okay.
Sorry. When you were doing your projects, would you get a lot of, or I guess to what degree of like local or even higher up government support would you get in the different areas you went to?
Government support?
Or if any.
Some places not at all. Some places, I mean, you know, in Afghanistan there are some areas where it was very strong. You know, I mean, good government support. People offering me, like, you know, assurances of safety, or local governments would do that. You know, if you were welcomed by leaders of villages, then other people would honor that. But have done really well. I mean, in Herat City, for example, where I've done a lot of water projects for really poor cluster-type living communities, I've had some great support there from most of them. You know, one of the things is that I think that they know the difference between people that come with organizations that are making a lot of money and have a lot of money, and they have learned how to treat them a little differently. And I think that's where a lot of the corruption is, you know. In this case, that's why I try to keep it simple. It's that they know that it doesn't have a lot of money. They know I'm not making a lot of money. There isn't a lot there, so they I think are more politically correct to just do the right thing for the people. Yeah. Anything else, guys? Yes? Well, if you can see from my photographs, I've loved every place that I've been to. You know, I went to Italy when they had the earthquake because I was born in the area, so it was always nice. It was really nice to go back and see my own country. I don't know. Afghanistan has been I'll say this. Afghanistan has been a big reward because it's been such a big challenge. To be able to make friends, very close friends, with what's perceived in this country as probably some of our worst enemies now, has been a great joy for me to know that that isn't true. And the character of the pioneer attitude of the people of Afghanistan, their survival is just an amazing thing. Probably something that we would have seen in this country 200-300 years ago. So it's nice to see that still being played out. It's been a very enriching experience there. So that could be one. Any others? Yes. It's great.
Do you use the same kind of water systems in each of the villages that you implement them in, or are they differing?
What's
in
that?
the different places?
The
Do you use
water
the same kind of water systems in all the different villages, or how are they different?
Oh,
if
the
they're
water
different?
systems that it's really. I was talking with one of the classes here today, the engineering students, about that. Different places have only certain possibilities of what you can do. I mean, in Africa, for example, some of these projects that I described to you, we can drill wells. And although it's expensive, it's not completely out of the question. So you can actually even bring in well drilling machines, and you can actually drill wells. Great solution, but expensive. In Afghanistan, places that up in the Hindu Kush Mountains, it's impossible. So what you have to do is look for the other sources of water, because you have mountains and you have springs up in the mountains. And one of the best systems that we've been building now is going and finding the springs and then building spring houses and then piping water by gravity down the mountains into catchments for the villages. That's good because everything we do there, the people are able to do. It's all labor, and so that works pretty well. I mean, where we're going to build this co-op water system for these 25 villages, there we're going to drill a well, and there we're going to use solar to pump the well, to run the pumps with. So we'll use alternate. We also try to use wind a few places to pump wells, but it all depends. Just have to work with the conditions of where you are, So that's, you got to keep an open mind. I could tell you one more little thing after this question.
Engineers that work with you, or how do you know?
Well, I've learned. First of all, I've learned a little bit during my years of building in some countries and working in some projects in the States. So, basic. This is Father D'Agostino was just a brilliant, wonderful man. And when we put this water system in, that serviced 1,000 of HIV orphan kids and 400. And he'd say, "Aldo, that was a great job. And for 2 years I was trying to get this done here, And now this isn't rocket science work that you've done, but you just wanted to get it done, I think part of it is just, hard work, respect, getting it done. And I do have people that help me when I need that, absolutely. There's an engineering firm in the States that acts as a volunteer. They help. And there's people in the country. So I always go and get the technical help, but most of the effort in trying to make these projects work really comes down to honesty, fortitude, and doing the right things. But the technical help that really isn't. It's out there. It's everywhere. That's not a problem. I mean, if all these groups would cooperate with one another, I mean, they just don't. There's as much competition in doing good for others as there is in other parts of our lives. So, but it's out there. So the technical stuff you can find pretty easily. Anyway.
This will be the last one.
How do you go about ensuring that once you leave, the community has the resources to keep moving forward to make the project sustainable? for example, you're talking about solar cells.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if those break? Like, what kind of resources do the
Well,
community
you know,
have?
that's right, and you have to be really careful and conscientious about what decisions you make. I mean, it is true that if you import Western technology, you're going to import Western problems, and we can barely fix our own problems when things break. So imagine being in some of these villages, and I mean, I installed some of these first systems up there and left, you know, like 5 handles to replace it if it ever breaks, and some of these, and I'd go back, and it was like, oh my God, it was like, they never used the replacement handles because I'm not sure they knew where they were. So now they've made what they like to do, make a wooden handle or something. So, and we did it again, and we did it, you know, we figured it out. Failing's okay, but you don't want to be foolish about failing either. So, and you learn over, now we have, you know, in all the projects that I'm doing, I work, now we have a nice network of people. Some of the government, how they don't want to put money in or really be responsible for anything. But what they do have is they have very, very smart, very dedicated, good people. So they become part of the team. So they go check on things now, and they're very conscientious that way. We create a community person who becomes really responsible and work out a little bit of a budget where the whole community can participate in putting up, maybe even if it's 5 cents a week from each person, so that somebody's making $5 a week, but there'll be a person who's a key person. You know, so we've learned how to set that up, which makes it so that's how they get maintained, and they're doing a pretty good job with it right now. But it's, you know, it is an effort to get to that point, but it's.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking
Oh,
Mr.
you okay? I'll tell you another story later.
Oh, yeah. Please join me in thanking Mr. Magazzini for sharing his insights with us. We do also invite you all to join us for the reception in the back. If you did have another question that didn't get answered, Mr. Magazzini will be there to answer them, and please feel free to enjoy some treats. Thank you.